Well, I made it down to the farm, and the hilltops are nice and dry, but the side hill seeps in the bottom of the terraces aren't. So I think rather than cutting ruts and potentially getting stuck, I'm gonna hold off for a little bit, maybe try again in a couple hours. And in the meantime, I'm going to try to rearrange a few things out here in the shed and also get the forklift. So take the sprayer off that tractor, put the forklift on, so that I can get some of my tote chemicals set up on the trailer so that they're ready to go. I don't know that I'm going to use anything out of totes today, but I'm hoping that I only have to unhook the sprayer once in the short term, and that's kind of the tractor that works best on the forklift. So time to play some machine shed Tetris. Well, I just went out and checked the fields, and it seems like things are still a little on the wet side to spray. And there's a line of showers on the radar that probably I might be able to get a load off before they got here, but maybe I'm not going to push it too hard since conditions aren't great. Might regret that next week if it starts raining or is super windy, but that's about my ambition level at the moment. Did get everything rearranged, got the totes on the spray trailer. Need to do a couple things on the sprayer because I haven't actually put the foam concentrate in the foam marker tank yet, and a couple other minor things setup wise. So I'm probably going to do that before I pull it in the shed, and then may get the monitor put in the bean planter tractor. Have maybe an hour or two of stuff that I need to look at on this before it's ready to go to the field. I've got a lower frame on the parallel linkage on the pusher unit here that busted when I was doing replant last year, I think, that I need to get fixed. I've got the stuff to put in there. I just need to take out 4 bolts and a couple springs to get that swapped out. Shouldn't be too big of a deal. And I need to put a set screw in the sprocket on the drive shaft there, and I was going to switch the transmission on this planter over to the short link chain. So it was like this double length, so this is like 2040 chain, I believe it's called. So it's the same as 40, but the links are twice as long. And this planter's always kind of had some tendency to be a little bit jerky, and I think part of that is because it has, I mean, like as these go around the idlers and stuff, you have like more variation in the tension of the chain. So I've got the stuff to switch out these little plastic sprockets to the roller style like this. That one's pretty beat up. I think the tensioners were rebuilt at some point and they're not in very good shape now, but that might be a project for next year at this point. None of that should take too long. It's a little looser than ideal. Well, I think it's just the hex rather than the bearing. And a couple other things to check over. Originally, my plan was to put at least the rear 8 rows new discs on this. When I was kind of checking it over before, I decided that maybe it wasn't in as bad a shape as I thought. So my current line of thinking is that I'm going to at least start planting with it this way probably, and then kind of see how things go. If we get a rain delay that I have a day that I can go through stuff, I might do some wholesale opener changes, or I may just run it this way for a year, replace the openers that the bearings are out or go out on, and do a little more thorough rebuilding before next year. The way the rotation is this year, so pretty much everything that I farm, we always rotate corn soybeans, like a 2-year rotation. Don't really do any corn on corn. The profitability is typically similar with average yields, I guess is the best way to put it. And you normally will have some yield hit from second year corn and not have the nitrogen credit from the soybean crop. So the way that the rotation is for me this year, I have more soybeans than corn. I also have a smaller soybean planter than a corn planter as far as width, although I can probably drive faster without adverse effects. So even though I'm done with corn, I'm not half done planting. So I've got a ways to go yet, and probably we'll have some maintenance to do on this during the season, but we'll get it hooked up to the tractor and probably start out with it pretty similar to its current condition and see how things go. It's Monday, April 27th, and mostly working on the bean planter. It rained a little bit overnight, not a lot, but it's way too windy to spray and pretty sure too wet to plant. Plus I have a few things to do on this yet. Also been screwing around with a little bit of auger stuff. Dad's hauling corn and switching bins and some other stuff that just had to deal with. But I did get the PTO pump hooked up, and one of the bolts on the drawbar had come off and the chain was loose, so I got that fixed, got it hooked up. So safety chain is there, got the monitor put in the tractor and the marker cable hooked up. I need to tape that together because the little plastic ring that you lock is busted. And then made a couple bushings. There's a bushing that's in here that allows the chain to sort of pivot on that freely. And when I was spotting in some beans last year, I had that bolt come loose on the other side and lost the bushing. But fortunately, I was able to find some pipe that seems like it's close enough that it'll work. It's a little bit big on the inside, but I think as long as it's not wearing on the bolt, it should serve the purpose. So I'm going to get that stuff put back together, and I forgot to put the washer in this side. I had to measure this one to see what I needed to make, and need to do a few other functionality tests on this and some minor replacements. I have a couple of gauge wheel tires that are cracked that I would like to replace. I don't know if I'll do that today or not. I think we have some, but they're kind of a pain to get off of there, because you have to knock out this roll pin that usually is rusted in pretty badly, and then take the wheel halves apart. So I don't know if I'm going to worry about that a ton. It's probably not ideal to have those cuts in the tires, but probably not going to cause the end of the world to come, so I may start with them that way, and when I get a break from weather or whatever, worry about that when I have a little more free time. The wind is supposed to be letting off some here in an hour or two, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to spray some soybean burn down, some of where I was hoping to spray yesterday and it was too wet. I haven't been out to see how much it's dried, but I would think with 7/100ths of an inch, like probably the low spots didn't get much wetter than they were, or on a relative basis to the rest of the field at least. And with the wind blowing and the sun shining, things should dry out fairly quickly on top. But I'm going to do a couple more things on the planter here and then go jump on the four-wheeler and assess the situation. It's about 4:30, and I just went and did a little four-wheeler survey of the fields in the area here. Looks like the corn stalks where I would be planting beans have too many wet spots to really spray. So I think what I'm going to do, so I guess the flip side of that is that it seems like the last year's bean stubble where I planted corn is pretty dry. So I think I'm going to just mix up some straight Roundup and go spray off where I put on the cereal rye and some of the kind of erosion prone spots and try to get that killed. It's I think upper 70s today, and the overnight low is 50s maybe, and it's supposed to be pretty warm tomorrow also, which hopefully should give me a pretty decent kill as long as I don't miss anything that hasn't grown back enough from the last that I planted. That's kind of my main concern, I guess. But that'll at least allow me to do something today, and then we'll see if or how much it rains tomorrow and go from there. Back at the shop now, and got all the rye on the corn ground sprayed off. Ended up using a whole load, kind of hit a few spots where there were some weeds coming. Had pretty good luck last year with some one pass kind of early post that I didn't intend to do that way, but got forced into because I got rained out. It actually worked pretty well, it seemed like, getting the residual herbicide out there later. I think maybe gave us a little more effect later in the season, to get to where the corn shaded the rows. Plus, we've occasionally seen a little bit of seedling issues. So my thought was maybe waiting until the corn was at least spiked to do the first pass would maybe avoid some potential injury to the plants and help them get off to a good start. the rye is one of those things that it would be a lot easier not to do, but there's some steeper spots on where I farm that I really don't like seeing erosion on, and I feel like I want to do everything that I can to keep that from happening, and the rye is one of the things that seems to make a difference. Not a perfect solution. Some of those spots definitely, terraces would be a lot better, but I'm not the one with the purse strings for that situation, so do what I can with the situation that I'm dealing with. The side effect of getting that sprayer load off this evening was that I was able to flush the rinse tank, so I've got this empty and I can get these hoses replaced. As you can see, there's a nice puddle on the floor here from when it was sitting in the shop the last few days, and it just dripped, but there's a spot, gets in this bottom hose, right there's where it's wet. Basically the hose is rubber, but it has a plastic spiral inside, so any hose that's used for suction will need some sort of reinforcement so it doesn't collapse on itself. And what typically happens with these hoses is that you get a break in the plastic and then it starts leaking through the crack in the hard plastic spiral. So I've got the stuff to swap these out to the Bumblebee style hose, which is more of a fertilizer type hose and a little bit larger outside diameter. I guess it's in the back of the shop now. Same idea, basically you have the yellow as the hard plastic and then the black rubber to give you the flex. But I went ahead and got enough of that to do both of those hoses. Most of the suction hoses, or most of the hose that's that type on this sprayer, we've replaced at this point. I mean, you can see, like, I think this was one that I replaced, and Dad had maybe done these too. So there is a few pieces, I guess, that we haven't done anything with yet. Maybe a line that goes to the inductor, or like a filter over here. But anyway, I figured if that one cracked, the other one probably wasn't very far behind, and they're not very long hoses, so they're not too expensive to replace. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do both. So I'm gonna get the hose clamps popped off and then see if they'll pull off or if I have to cut them. But hopefully it should be a 15-minute or 20-minute project to get those swapped out. Alright, got the old hoses off and the new ones on, the stuff up inside the frame. So now I just need to get them onto the hose barbs here and get hose clamps on, and I'll be done. I did end up having to cut them off. I don't know if it'll show up very well in the video, but there's a pretty serious barb on these fittings, so wasn't able to pull it off and had to sort of just cut gently. But you can see the white spots there are the plastic spiral that's inside the hose. So that's what gives it its stiffness, so that it doesn't collapse under suction. The ones that we're putting on now are a little different style, but same concept. I am changing out the hose clamps. Usually when we do these, we end up having to put on new hose clamps because the fertilizer style hose is a little bit larger diameter on the outside and the clamps usually don't fit. I think I maybe could have reused these, but they're freaking dinky, pansy little hose clamps. So I found some that are a little more robust that should fit. I am using some high-dollar dish detergent here to lubricate the hoses to get them to go over the fittings. But we should be on the home stretch here. We're back together, other than a lock clip and the hose clamps. I ended up kind of cheating on getting these fittings into the hose. I tried to shove it on with the fitting attached to the tank and was having trouble. So when I put the other ends on, I kind of twisted the hose, and it seemed like that helped because you could sort of like thread the barb up into the spiral hard plastic. So basically just pulled out, there's like this wire lock clip thing that goes through the holes and then locks into this groove on the mating fitting. So it's pretty easy to pop that out and take the fitting loose, and then there's just an O-ring right here that's actually what seals everything up. So that made it much easier to get the fitting onto the hose. And then I just have to get this back in here, which, like most things in life, is easier with two hands. It seems like the clip is a little bit sprung for some reason. All right. So I'll tighten down those hose clamps and latch down the rinse tank on the other side, and we should be back in business. If you're not familiar with sprayers, when I say rinse tank, this has just clean water in it, so no herbicide, and then we'll use that to flush out the booms so that there's not herbicide chemicals sitting in that could like settle out or get stuck in the boom and then damage the next crop that you're going to spray, or even if you're switching between chemicals or whatever, to flush out what you were spraying before, so that you have clean water and whatever you just put in the tank when you go to the next field. So I think this is like 125 gallons or something like that, so plenty to be able to rinse out the boom at the end of the day, or if we're getting at the end of the field or the end of one spray recipe, a lot of times we'll mix up the load like a little on the short side, and then if we need an extra acre, we can just pull 10 or 15 or 20 gallons out of the rinse tank to get the last little patch done and be able to mix up exactly what we need. So in addition to the rinse tank, obviously we have kind of the main spray tank, which would have our spray solution in it. Then we also have a foam marker, which is up, basically a plastic tank up inside the frame. So basically what that is, it has an air compressor and then uses essentially soap and water to make foam that comes out at the end of the boom. If you can see the white hanging off right there, there's a little bit that's still working its way out of the system from when I was spraying earlier. Then we have the rinse tank for the spray system. Then we also have hand rinse water up here. There's like 3 gallons or something like that, that we can just turn the water on or turn the valve to be able to rinse off our gloves. Like if I have a nozzle get plugged up or have to mess with something on the boom, I always have rubber gloves in the tractor, but then try to rinse them off with clean water, so that you don't have a bunch of chemical residue getting all over the inside of the tractor cab and everything else. But we're all buttoned up on this. Got the hose clamps tight, got our fancy zip tie back on. I hope it's in close enough to the same spot. I think the idea was just to keep it kind of away from some of the metal stuff here and kind of tied up. So I think it should serve the purpose, and hopefully tomorrow there won't be a puddle on the floor.